Well, convicted killer Scott Peterson is pushing for a new trial. On Wednesday, he's set to have a hearing about DNA evidence he once introduced that he says will prove his innocence. Mr. Peterson is being aided by the LA Innocence Project, who says he has been wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife, Laci, and unborn son. For a preview of that hearing, here with us is legal analyst and trial attorney Misty Marris and NewsNation correspondent Caitlin Becker. Ladies, let's just jump right into this because we're all familiar with the case. Caitlin, Peterson is set for a hearing on DNA testing this Wednesday. What material does he want reviewed and re-examined?
Some very specific DNA material here. So this is the second of 3 upcoming hearings that we had. We already had one. I was at that hearing in the courtroom last month, and this is all in his effort to get a new trial, specifically when it comes down to this DNA evidence. There's a burned out mattress with blood on it that was found inside of a burnt out van nearby where Laci first disappeared. Now, this is very old evidence from many, many years ago. And the theory is that that blood could possibly have belonged to Laci or their unborn son, Connor. And what Peterson is looking for is the okay from the judge and to be able to get this tested. And the LA Innocence Project is going to actually pay for that testing, so it doesn't even come out of any sort of state budget or federal budget there. The issue is whether or not it will be enough, even if they can test the DNA and they find it belongs to a female or a male. If they can't test it against Laci's, it might be a moot point. So that's really what the judge is going to determine, whether or not this is kind of a wild goose chase and whether or not this is worth the court's time to do. But the purpose of getting it tested is if her blood is found inside of this van on this mattress, he wasn't around when that happened. So essentially what he's saying, it couldn't have been me, and I had nothing to do with that van, so therefore I could not have committed that crime.
And for the record, he has proclaimed his innocence from the very beginning.
Get-go.
I was a reporter in the Bay Area, Misty, when all of this broke, and we covered this story extensively. Misty, what basis does Peterson and the LA Innocence Project have for this new DNA testing and a new trial? Because, Misty, you and I both know the Innocence Project usually does not take on a trial or take on a case that they don't feel confident about.
Yeah, definitely. The Innocence Project is a powerful organization with a lot of resources. So the fact that they were involved in this case certainly signals that they believe there might be a path to a new trial for Scott Peterson. But to break it down, Caitlin articulated it perfectly, because the first step here is whether or not the DNA testing can actually take place. And that's what the judge is going to decide. This is based on a legal theory of newly acquired evidence. So that means evidence that came to light after the trial. Now, in order for that evidence to be at play in this pursuit of a new trial, it has to be what's called material. That means that the evidence, if it were to be presented to a jury, could have had a different outcome, and ultimately that person could have been found not guilty. So it is a pretty long path to get there. Step one is obviously the DNA evidence, and prosecutors submitted a 300-page submission, which basically refutes the defense arguments as to the retesting of these items. And one of the things that they focused on is all of the circumstantial evidence, the way Scott Peterson acted during the time of his trial, the lies that he was caught in, and they say, no matter what happens, this guilty verdict should stand. So this is just step one in a long path to potentially overturn the conviction.
The accusation isn't assumed that the prosecution held any evidence. We're just talking about new material that has come to light since the trial, to be correct?
So there's actually 2 buckets. So first is DNA evidence that the defense wants to retest. The second will be subject to what's called a post-discovery hearing that will take place in July. And what the defense says during that hearing, they're going to argue that prosecutors held back information and material relating to the investigation during the time Scott Peterson was actually being investigated and during the time of his arrest. So that will be the subject of another post-conviction hearing in July. And whether or not a new trial actually happens will largely depend on what the judge allows to be in that bucket of evidence that could actually be the basis for an appeal, both from the DNA perspective and during that post-conviction hearing.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.